Wow, I wondered like who would actually want to hear about resilience when Alex said, let's talk about resilience, but hi everybody. 4 years ago, right after my birthday, which is in March, which was right after RSA, which was in February that year, is when COVID happened. I live in North Carolina, around the Raleigh area. My friend over here is a New Jersey boy. You'll hear from him in a minute. But where I lived, everything shut down. I know it was different in different countries and different states and everything. And so as we came through like March and April and May, things got really weird. Then we had the shelter at home order. That was when stuff really got weird for me. I'm an introvert, so I actually loved COVID like conceptually, but I don't like being told what to do, so I didn't like being told I couldn't go places and do things. But literally everything shut down. Our schools shut down, the gym shut down, the stores shut down. And God bless all of you with kids who were homeschooling for about a year. I don't know how you did it, because I don't have kids, but I had like dogs, and that was enough for me. So for about a year where I lived, the schools were all closed, everybody was doing at home remote learning. And then finally, at the beginning of the next year, the schools opened back up. And you could just have this like collective sigh of relief of all of the parents that were trying to work and then be full-time teachers as well. And that lasted about 3 weeks. So about 3 years to the day today, something else happened. And then our school buses couldn't run. We couldn't get gas. And that was Colonial Pipeline. So where I lived in the southeast, we were impacted for many weeks. We've had story after story, bridges, Maersk, Merck, 20% of the global economy impacted in the past several years with each cyber incident. And it's all just a lesson for us in resilience, which is why Alex and I are here today to talk about how to build a program, what are your steps, what do you need to be thinking about and doing. And so I'm going to hand it over to Alex. He's going to talk through a little bit of the background, and we're going to give you a case study, including actually walking through the steps with using something like Colonial Pipeline, and hope that helps you guys.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So let me kind of set a little bit of a stage here. First of all, when we were putting this together, one of the things that Jen decided, and by the way, she and I worked together on a lot of working groups and all, and I kind of pity some of the people who have to be around us at times. But one of the things she told me is she had to go first because nobody wanted to hear a Jersey accent to start anything.
I did say that.
She did really say that,
yeah.
And I'm going to hold her to it. You're also going to see that we're going to go back and forth a little, and we're doing that for two reasons. One is, while directionally we're aligned, we have a very different focus on where we come from. So the idea is to give you the best picture whatsoever. The second is, you've probably noticed already, we're both kind of kinetic people. We're always moving. And if you let one of us stand around way too long, you never know what's really going to happen, right? So we're going to go back and forth a little. A couple of other things. The slides are designed to be standalone, so you can take them with you, you can hand them out, you can do whatever. There's a lot of information in there. We're not going to read every slide. We're not going to go through every dot point. There's resources attached to it, so there's a lot there, right? So we're set that up. We'll be around afterwards. We have business cards. You can talk about it. And the other one is I have gifts. So if anybody's interested in poppers, these are some of the coolest things I've ever seen at a conference. So I had to go get a couple hundred of them and give them away. When they work, they're great.
Alex doesn't get out much.
Now, usually they only let me out for 24 hours at a time if it's supervised. Is this the one? No.
You're paying me by the hour for tech support, right?
Yes.
Okay.
How about if you click on that button right there? Like that little arrow? That didn't work either. Oh, there we are. Run disclaimer. All right. we're going to do this in 6 sections. Obviously, resources is the last piece. And like I said, we're going to go back and forth. Whoa. Here we go. All right, intro to resilience. So the concept of resilience, while new to those of us in technology and all, it's a very, very old concept, right? Darwin talked about the species that survive are the ones that adapt. And that's what resilience is all about. If you look historically, we've looked at things like disaster recovery and business continuity as either you were alive or dead. Resilience is all about staying active, staying viable in the midst of adversity. And there's a lot of other disciplines that have a lot of other examples. So the operational resilience definition, as you see there, is just what we talked about. There are basically 5 principles, guiding principles. By the way, this all comes from something called the ORF, the Operational Resilience Framework, done by the Global Resilience Federation as part of the Business Resilience Council. I know there's a lot of acronyms in there, but you get the idea. The real crux of it is, number 1, incidents happen. They are now a part of our lives. If you look at historically how we've treated cybersecurity, we've taken technical defenses, very strong ones, put them towards the enemy with the idea that we can build a technology defense that these guys will never get through, will never have to deal with it. Oh, that's an improvement. Right? So the idea incidents will happen. Knowing incidents will happen means 3 things. When they do happen, we want to minimize the impact. Standard risk management practices. We want to reduce the blast radius, one of my favorite terms in this discipline. We want to detect faster and we want to recover quickly. Now, in a second, we'll talk about some metrics. We really stink at detection. As an industry, we stink at it. 3 basic phases: protect, detect, recover. NIST and the CSF, which I assume everybody in this room is familiar with. Those 3 basic phases have been decomposed into 5, and then you start looking at international standards, you see variations. So we usually talk about the 3, protect, detect, recover, because no matter how many pieces you break it into, it comes down to those 3. The other piece about resilience is we have gone one step further. It's no longer about technology, but it's about the people, the process, and now we're talking about organization, culture, and governance practices. ISACA has done a really nice job of building out those 4 pieces as part of their digital trust framework. Minimum acceptable levels: business continuity, disaster recovery. The world was alive or dead. We operated or we didn't. Now we're making decisions about what is most important, and that's usually done based on outside commitments, but it's based on business priorities. What has to be viable at what point in time? So instead of statements like, we can't be offline for more than 4 hours, okay? Service A must have 80%, must be 80% viable within 2.5 hours. Service B can be offline to 100% of customers in no more than 6 hours. So instead of saying we're alive or dead with a specific number, we actually have to make priorities. Minimal acceptable levels has now been formally adopted as part of recommendations to the president. They've been adopted by CISA. There was a PCAST report put out about 6 weeks ago, specifically focused on the impact of cyber to the digital world: water, gas, electric, transportation, airlines. The idea of minimum acceptable levels based on priorities is one of the 4 top recommendations. So expect to see that. Now you're trying to make sure I memorize the slides, aren't you? And then the last piece is it's multidisciplinary. Kind of obvious, right? It's no longer the IT folks doing IT things. It cuts across the entire organization, Everybody's involved. Different levels, different ways. Thank you. So if you ever need somebody for tech support, did we miss that one or? I'm sorry? That's what I thought. How come the slide on here is not the slide on there? This is all about resilience, right?
Oh, wow.
Right? If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong.
It's this screen.
All right.
No?
There we go.
It's this one.
Yeah, don't move.
Ever?
Yes. So we talked about we really stink at detection. That's what the numbers say. Now, I have to caveat this. This is from the old DBIR report, and I'm gonna give Verizon credit that after we produced this slide and we were told that we can't make any changes, they come out with a new report. So we're gonna go with the old numbers, but they're consistent. Organizations, we have poured tons and tons of money into detecting incidents, bad things happening, right? Turns out, 2/3 of the time, we don't know about them, right? Either the hacker tells us because they want us to send them some money, or a third party we deal with tells us. We really stink at detection. So one of the major investments that you'll see happening in the resilience space is how do we detect better? Also, the time it takes us to detect on the ones we do detect, it stinks, right? The number is not good. We're talking at roughly 9 months. Now, that number will be higher if we take out the percentage that is the bad actors telling us about it, but it's bad. And of course, the ones that are the hardest to detect are the ones that involve valid credentials. All right, so once again, we are back to identity and authentication. Let's see if I can get this right. There we go. And then technology is no longer sufficient, right? Everybody in this room already knows this, right? You look at the rise of attacks. It used to be a technology thing against technology, right? It's now the social engineering. Look at the major hacks out of the casinos in Vegas, social engineering attacks.
I think he is now.
Numbers are there. These attacks cannot be stopped with technology alone, so it goes back to the idea of the people, the process, and the organization. The numbers, by the way, I have independent studies that are not publicly releasable that the numbers are very, very consistent. So this is done by KnowBe4. Everybody here has probably heard of KnowBe4, right? They sell awareness training, so of course, they produce reports on it, but the numbers that they come up with are very good and they're very consistent with the privately held numbers. When we talk about awareness, something like 98 or 99% of social engineering attacks through phishing never makes it to the enterprise. It's stopped by the ISP, it's stopped by our edge point detection, all this, right? The numbers are huge. Of the percentage that gets through, you only need one person in an organization to click to cause a problem. The average blast radius on a ransomware attack, which is analogous to any sort of malware, is that any machine that's penetrated will infect 22 others. So within 3 hops, an 8,000 person organization is totally offline. Right? The numbers are bad. What we also know is with privileged accounts, these folks are being attacked more and more. So we do specialized training around privileged users, help desks, SOC staff, executives, their assistants. We see all that. And by the way, the thing with awareness, nice thing about it is the lowest cost investment you can make, and it's easy to detect that it's working. Do you know the number one way you know awareness training is working? Your staff gets paranoid and they call the help desk more often. right? It's true, right? You know you've done good awareness training because suddenly they're calling that hotline. Or if you have a group that you can send a a suspicious email to and say, can you look at this for me? The volume goes up. So it's a low-cost investment, high benefit, easy to detect. We kind of talked about this. The thing is, disaster recovery is recovering IT. Business continuity is recovering the business. Resilience is all hazards, and it's much greater emphasis on staying viable in the midst of adversity. Aren't you supposed to take over at some point?
I'm waiting until the next slide.
Yeah. I just had to find out what slide we agreed on. So sorry about that. So contagion. Believe it or not, this is a reserved word. It's actually set by international standards. And what it basically means is when one member, usually referred to as a party, in an ecosystem gets infected and how it spreads. This is a term and concept that was adopted by the financial services sector, 2008, but not for the situations we're talking about. 2008, financial crisis, right? It actually started out as a trade imbalance, and there's some great work done on that area. But what had happened is as interest rates locked up and counterparty risk could not be understood, the entire system locked up and it's moving globally. That's contagion. In our interconnected world, when one organization sneezes, somebody else catches a cold. We see this continuously. And again, it started out in the financial system, and this is where it's going. But it has a lot to do with the interconnected world we're in now, cloud, working remote, right? Look at the stuff that happened recently with United Healthcare, right? Who knew everybody on the planet was affected either directly or indirectly by a lack of payments in the healthcare system? We talked a bit about 2020 when the world locked down during COVID. Look at the supply chains. Northern Italy locks down, and all of a sudden we find out that every medical company on the planet sources something out of northern Italy. Organizations had no idea it was there. By the way, Jennifer, gets great credit for these slides. She did these using AI, and I give her a lot of credit. Did you want to explain
sure.
your football rugby story?
So if you are not familiar with RSA conference, when you're speaking here, they like to have your slides months in advance. And I'm on the program committee, so I know this. So Six Nations rugby was happening while we were working on this content. And it kind of started making me think, because I was having a conversation with somebody else, we're explaining to friends who were starting to watch rugby why and how rugby is different than football. And I don't know if I was up too late or too early one day, but somehow the resilience and cyber resilience and the rugby football conversation kind of meshed in my head, and I woke up with this, and Dolly helped me make graphics. But it's a perfect example and representation of what we're looking at here. So in football, you have players that are very specialized, you have backups, you have playbooks, and you're ready for any possible failure. But rugby's a little bit different. Rugby doesn't stop. Your number is your position, but there is no offensive and defensive team. In rugby, every player is supposed to just be there and be ready to do whatever happens on the field. And when you come off the field, you don't come back on unless there's a concussion. So their operational resilience is more about being ready for anything that happens, not just the stuff that you think might happen that's been planned out. And so I think this conversation is interesting. So as you can probably tell, Alex comes more from the policy and the GRC side. I came in the world as a network and infrastructure architect. So this is interesting because people like him decide we need to do something and fix stuff, and then I'm stuck with the rest of you trying to figure out how the hell we're actually going to do it and operationalize it from a technical standpoint. So we started looking at this and saying, how do we prepare when the ecosystem is so much larger? So I'm going to fast forward to this and say that picking up where Alex was talking about business continuity and disaster recovery, we're really expanding the ecosystem and the inputs into what we're doing in the technical side based on how the entire business operates, which is all of the customers, all of the vendors and dependencies. We've talked about supply chain risk for how long now? And so you start to, this is not exhaustive, but you can start to see that when we're planning resilience and our first steps, we have to involve all of these different groups, departments, domains, and the different ecosystems. So everything from your employees to your partners to your clients and customers. So kind of getting into the roadmap and these steps, and we're going to show you the same thing a few different ways, including a case study. But first I'm just going to give you the big picture and the 7 steps, and a little bit of context about how they are and what the flow is between them. And we're going to double click into the first 2 steps because our assumption is for most of you guys here, if you're in this room, you're probably somewhere in the first couple of steps, putting a program together or building it out. So what it looks like is the first 4 here. The first thing is that you have to have some foundation for having a program. Your organization needs to have committed to some type of governance or frameworks for controls and risk management, and then you need to make sure you have the pieces in place to sustain that program. So I'm going to double click into this in a minute, but that really just means identifying an executive and an owner of that program and then working through sustainability so that that program outlives, the 90-minute meeting that we had about it. Then you're getting into understanding the ecosystem. So that diagram I just showed you guys with all of those different organizational units, all of those different inputs, this is getting outside of our normal boxes and starting to understand the whole domino effect that Alex was showing with what, internally starting off. When one domino goes, which other ones follow? And sometimes it's not linear. So that's understanding the ecosystem. Then you start getting into the planning pieces. So you're going to define the minimum viable service levels. And here's where the case study, I think, is way more meaningful than a bunch of weird words strung together that only mean something if you've read the document. But defining the minimum viable service levels is going to be speaking to, we're not just up or down. How far can we limp along in an impaired state? How do we prioritize which customers, which products or service deliveries based on that domino effect externally? Where can we stop the dominoes falling or slow them down so that it doesn't hit one of the lines of dominoes where it starts spreading out and impacting the community at large? And then we get into establish the service delivery options, which is then what does that mean and how do we support that customer facing and internally? The last few steps are a little more intuitive, I think. They're really going to be revamping or updating what you already have in place now, preserving critical data sets, things like immutable backups, and then recovery, obviously a critical part of this, and then the independent tests. So we have just a little bit of a taste of what it means to develop the maturity model for this and what the independent testing might look like, but mostly we're going to save that for a different conversation and give you guys some resources if you're that far along. So I promised to double click into just the first 2 steps, and this will set you up for the case study that Alex is going to walk you through. That foundational framework, and again, this is just about having a commitment. One of the things that frustrates me as a consultant and an architect are organizations that are here. Now, a lot of us are here if this is a starting point somewhere. It's nothing to be ashamed about, it's just where we are. But don't come ask me which honeypots to buy when you don't even know what CIS and NSF are, right? Was that Wolf laughing? That was Wolf laughing. Hi, Wolf. Start where you are. So don't start thinking about the future things if you're in an organization that hasn't committed to having a security program and risk management. That really is critical. Then this sponsorship and the sustainability, so make sure you are going to feed and care for this program so that it outlives, again, that little short meeting. And then the second step that I'm double clicking into here is understanding the ecosystem. This is really getting into the nitty-gritty operationally with business management. What are we doing? Who are we doing it for? How are we doing it? And then starting to go internally and connect those dots back into things like infrastructure and understand what has to happen. Do we need to spin up another cloud instance? Do we need a partner? Do we need to bring in a competitor if X, Y, and Z happens? That's the resilience planning, is working in an impaired state.
Cool.
This is working.
Thank you. So, a couple things to... She doesn't trust me near her phone. I don't blame her. So, a couple things here. Anybody here familiar with DTCC? All right. Usually, not a lot of hands go up when I ask that question. They are a systemically important part of the financial institution. If you ever buy or sell or trade a stock, it gets settled by DTCC. All right. So working with DTCC on a few things, obviously they're very concerned about resilience. All the systemically important banks are. They shared an interesting story the other day. The head of architecture for DTCC, he talked about Michael Phelps being a good example of resilience. I didn't know that he won one of his gold medals when he couldn't see. What had happened is he was swimming in the middle of his butterfly, which is his strong stroke. He lost his goggles and wasn't able to see. But because his coach had run him through different scenarios of things that could happen during a meet, they changed salinity of the water, they changed the temperature of the water, they changed all sorts of things. And at one point they said, well, let's say you're swimming blind. Why would I be swimming blind? He learned to count his strokes. So this way he could count his strokes, know when he was close to the wall, turn and bounce off the wall and go back. That's about resilience. Because the more of these things you practice and anticipate, you are guaranteed you're going to hit an incident that has nothing to do with what you've done before, but the simple fact of having gone through it is what makes a difference. So, just a little story to share. The case study, this is right off of the the GRF website. It's one of a handful of case studies, and you can guess it was generated because of Colonial Pipeline. A little bit of trivia. After Colonial Pipeline, one of the things the White House did, I'm going to give the current administration a lot of credit. They've been doing a lot of good stuff around cyber. One of the things they did is said, well, who's the regulator? Who regulates pipelines? Anyone want to guess who it is? Turns out it's TSA. The same people that check your luggage on the way into the airport, they're responsible for pipelines. Right? Needless to say, they've kind of learned a lot more about pipelines recently. But this was designed specifically because of that event. It resonated, and it also is representative of the issues that we have with the relationship between the physical and digital worlds. Another one on water. Anybody here remember when thousands of people were injured in Florida because somebody tampered with the water filtration system? Of course not, it was prevented. Real world attack, Oldsmar, Pennsylvania. Florida, excuse me. Homeland Security, CISA in particular, had sent out a warning that they knew that there were foreign adversaries looking at screwing around with water systems. They got around all the technical controls. The thing that caught it was a manager watching the screen, noticing the mixtures in the water was being altered. So let's talk about this. Bottom line, Colonial Pipeline. That's what the scenario is all about. First step in all of this, now the 7-step model here. First thing is governance and frameworks. This is a little different than what we normally see from business continuity and disaster recovery, right? Business continuity usually hits with a business unit talking about how do we get people back to work. Disaster recovery, how do we get IT functioning again? This is about the entire business. What we see is in organizations that are dealing with resilience, these are usually SVP or higher positions, and it's not unusual for it to also be a board position. Now, that's for a bunch of reasons. One of them is in certain highly regulated environments like financial services, that it's a board position because it's a board imperative, but also because of the impact it has on the business and to the customers. And customers are not only individuals who are getting your services, but it's your suppliers. It's your upstream vendors that you have agreements with that are responsible, that if you go down, everybody above them goes down, and then the folks below you. And we kind of coined a term called a cyber resilience executive. Put in whatever you want, whatever term you want. The idea was to come up with a general name for that position. One of the key parts of that is they actually have budgetary authority and decision-making capability. Understanding the ecosystem, this is a lot harder than it sounds. I think all of us in this room are probably dealing with supply chain risk management, third-party risk management, and every time we turn around, there's another connection we never knew about. There's been another agreement written, there's been another vendor brought on that we never knew were there, or they're tied to somebody else. We're also finding industry-wise that, what a surprise, we're aggregating risk in the cloud, right? The more we use the cloud for, the more data we give it, the more reliant on it, the more risk we're aggregating in the cloud. The other thing that we're seeing is, you gotta love it, if the world has really coalesced down to 3 primary cloud providers, and guess what? The rest of them, rest of the other services out there tend to rely on them, right? So in addition to aggregating risk by having all of our data and services in there, we're finding that they themselves are interconnected. What I can tell you on the upside, there is a fair amount of work going on behind the scenes about how to manage that, and I give the cloud providers a lot of credit for going down those roads. Now, in understanding the ecosystem, it really requires you to spend time with each of the businesses to understand the relationships. This is not a technology problem. It's a business problem. One of the systemically important banks, one of the top 3, I'll say that. One of the top 3 banks, when we were talking about how to do this, I almost fell over. They have 6,500 tier 1 providers they deal with. Like, holy crap. They didn't even realize the number was that big. But the reality is, when something happens with one of them, it ripples through the system. If the bank itself loses connectivity or ability to do service, it affects all the others. The key here is to start taking a look at these relationships and classifying them in terms of the importance to you and your business and the reliance they have on you. The other key piece is to understand how tightly coupled you are, right? The example I like to use is if you are dealing with somebody but it's all fax transmission, yes, there's still fax machines out there. It's all fax machines going back and forth. That's a very different scenario than if you're connected, you got a lot of machine to machine going on. Very different scenario. With understanding the ecosystem like we talked about, it's really connecting back to what's most important. So for example, in this particular scenario, we broke it down by commercial gas stations, consumers, and airports. Why? 3 different sets of customers, 3 different sets of impacts. Let's face it, the average consumer not getting gasoline is very different than emergency services not getting gasoline, right? In times of need, if you can't get your 911 call goes through and the response is, yeah, when we can get some gas, maybe we'll send somebody over, it doesn't really do much good. And then we also have issues where if we can't keep planes flying, we can't supply airports, then that starts to have a national and international impact, right? So it's, again, looking at that. How you break it up and all that, it depends a lot on your industry. Viable service levels. This is the key part here that resonated the most with CISA and the White House, that is being adopted as one of the 4 recommendations to be looked at for the relationship between the digital world and the physical world. Because again, we can't bring all people online together at all times, right? So the reality is we have to make decisions. There's a thing out there called a business impact assessment, very well understood in the risk community, very well understood in the business side, not so well understood by the IT and cyber folks, right? BIAs. That document is a document that's written and driven by the business that talks about exactly this, but we're categorizing it in a slightly different way. So instead of saying your mean time to recover is 4 hours, or saying our recovery point objective is, it's really becoming more granular regarding levels of service per customers. Then the same thing, service delivery objectives, right? How do we take that and start to anticipate it? By the way, the difference between an objective and an agreement, this comes up all the time. The objective is what internally you want to have happen. When you start talking about things like SLA, service level agreements, that's what you've put down in writing with the other party. It's a point of confusion. Tracking progress and prioritizing activities. Sounds kind of simple, right? You start looking at the maturity of where you are. This is never ending. You're always trying to grow. One of the things we're looking at coming out with at some point is a maturity model. I'm going to go through this a little quick so we can have some time for discussions. Right now it's mapped to 3 basic sets of framework, 853 CSF, and we're looking at, we have some crosswalks into the 27001. Kind of obvious. I'm going to go through this quickly because I want to get to questions. All right, couple things. This is the PCAST report I was talking about, President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. This one is particularly around the digital physical world. Good report. This talks about the need for public-private partnerships because as things become more systemically important, individual organizations can't handle it on its own. National Cybersecurity Strategy is based on 3 R's. One of the R's is resilience. The other one is on shifting responsibility, like we saw with the CSFRB report, shifting responsibility back to Microsoft. I'm only picking on them because it's a public report. And regulation, harmonizing regulations so we don't spend more time figuring out regulations than we do implementing them. And here's 3 good resources. The bottom 2 just dropped today. They put them out specifically because of this conference, which caused us a little bit of a shuffle today because we didn't have the links to include, but that's okay. All right, questions? Comments? I'm sorry? Go back a slide.
Oh, that's not hooked up anywhere. Okay.
There we go. By the way, this is you can download the PDF, right? And the other thing is,
if you can't remember the ORF, just think about the seals in the bay this morning going oof, 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 oof. Did you guys see that on the news?
By the way, did anybody get a video of that? All right. Questions, comments, thoughts? Recommending place for Chinese food? Oh, yes.
So, where do you think zero trust has any part to play in the cyber resilience strategy? Like,
I love you. All
Did you
right.
pay him to ask that?
I don't know. So first of all, Jen and I both chair a couple of working groups on zero trust. Zero trust, the whole thing about shifting left to security by default, design and default, all these things that you see coming out, they all have a resilience flavor to them. The update to the CSF, it's no accident. It's now focused not only on technology, but also people, process, organization. All of the efforts you see happening globally are all resilience-based. Europe actually has a resilience standard called DORA. Canada, being Canada, has a resilience effort. They have never given it a name. And in the US, we have a lot of things going on, a lot of reports and different things going on and standards and all, but the way we are, we never say it, just there. So all these things fit together. Anybody else? Yes.
Don't you agree that the most likely scenario that can trigger these processes today is cyber, right?
Yes.
But thinking about this, if we keep out cyber in the scenario,
Oh, yeah, we could repeat the question if you guys don't have the mic. Do you have the mic?
Oh, there's a mic. All right, let me see if I can capture it real quick. I think, go ahead. And
okay, so can you hear me? Yeah. So we are talking, thinking about that cyber is one of the scenarios that most likely would trigger this resilience process to start and to the BCP and all that stuff, right? But we have many other scenarios taking out cyber that could trigger that again, right? So don't you think that in the company, maybe more than cyber resilience, we should thinking about corporate resilience, something like this?
so the short answer is yes, but that's one of the reasons it has a resilience corporate executive in charge of it. So this work is actually done under the Business Resilience Council. The Business Resilience Council is designed for all hazards, right, no matter the source. The belief is, you can argue whether it's true or not, is we have a much better handle on the physical world, weather, temperature, water, you go right down, earthquakes, than we do on the cyber world. So a lot of what's being done in the resilience space is really building on all of that, right, the digital side. Now, the reality is we can get more hurt in digital, right, because we're so interconnected. And we also don't have problems with, at least we don't think we do, we don't have problems with other nation states trying to affect our weather to take out a data center.
I don't know. You
They
saw
might
the
be.
balloon.
There we go. There we go. There was a balloon.
There was a balloon.
But the reality is, we do know that we can. That pretty much every cyber power on the planet, and even people sitting in their mother's basements, can use malware to take out physical infrastructure like water, electricity, right? So it's a bigger issue. Does that really?
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
And as somebody who works in, I've spent my whole career in critical infrastructure, basically all of the sectors. Yeah, it's not meant to diminish the physical threats. It's just meant to build on top of them.
Yep. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Oh, I think I saw a hand up there a second. Oh.
Somebody's stretching. No, I think we're good. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.